IELTS Listening, version 30623. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. Write all your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1 on page 2 of your question booklet. Section 1. You will hear a telephone conversation between a woman who is looking for information about holidays and an agent for a tour company. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 7 on page 2. You will see that there is an example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Asia Pacific Tours, can I help you?
Yes, I've been looking at your website and I'd like some more information about your activity holidays.
Certainly. You know, of course, the prices of the tours include stays in 3-star hotels and they include airfares.
Great. What about your tour of Vietnam? My sister went there last year and loved it.
The first tour the caller asks about is Vietnam, so Vietnam has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 7.
Asia Pacific Tours, can I help you?
Yes, I've been looking at your website and I'd like some more information about your activity holidays.
Certainly. You know, of course, the prices of the tours include stays in 3-star hotels and they include airfares.
Great. What about your tour of Vietnam? My sister went there last year and loved it.
Yes, it's a really beautiful place and probably our fastest growing destination. Now that package includes several opportunities to take courses.
Don't you have a cookery course of some kind?
We certainly do. If you love eating out in Vietnam like most people do and want to know how to prepare a meal, you can learn how from a master in a 5-star hotel. On another day, you have a choice of 2 activities. The first is instruction in diving in the South China Sea. Not a certificate course, but just an introduction. Most people think it's wonderful. Or, if you want to stay dry but still want some exercise, you can spend the day on a trek through the jungle near the beach. It's not difficult, and everyone seems to enjoy it.
Anything cultural on offer?
We used to take people to a Vietnamese opera, but that didn't prove so popular. So now we include a dance show, and our clients all rave about that. They say the colours are just magnificent.
What's the cost?
I've just noticed it's now a special price. The holiday used to be £1,600, but it's just been reduced to £1,450, so you do save quite a bit. And as I said, it seems to be our up-and-coming tour.
Well, let's see. Perhaps you could tell me a little about the Hong Kong tour. I notice it includes a walk in the hills of one of their country parks, where you have the chance to see birds of all sorts.
Yes, that's a very popular activity. People don't realise that Hong Kong isn't just a crowded city. That's a half-day activity and you go with a trained escort, and it includes dinner in a monastery where you end your day. And then we wouldn't want you to miss out altogether on shopping, so there's another day when we take you round an electronics factory. Now, That might sound like an odd thing to do, but it's actually really fascinating and not like your usual ceramics factory. And you can buy their products there quite cheaply. Now, the whole Hong Kong package is just £1,320 per person.
Sounds interesting.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 8 to 10 on page 2. Now listen and answer questions 8 to 10.
But let me find out about one more place. I've always wanted to go to Korea, but not on this trip. And I've been to Thailand, which I loved. But what about your Japan package?
Good choice. Well, that tour includes a terrific trip to a museum of traditional costume. The exhibits are gorgeous. They've got an absolutely priceless collection.
And I think the website says you take your clients to a market, don't you? A crafts market, I think.
Well, we do go to a market, but it's one that sells fish, and it's one of the largest in the world. And you have the chance to sample the wares in a little restaurant nearby. We also give you plenty of free time to wander around the city with our guides if you want.
And what's the cost of all that?
£1,800.
Well, you've been ever so helpful. I've noted all the details down, and I'll get back to you when I've made up my mind.
If we can give you any more help, do ring back.
Thanks, I will.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 2 on page 3. Section 2. You will hear the organizer of a weekend dancing course for adults welcoming a group of participants to the community center where the course is being held. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14 on page 3. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
Hello everyone and welcome to this weekend dancing course. Nice that you're here safely. Since you've all just arrived, I'd like to tell you firstly a bit about today's program and secondly how to get around this community centre. Firstly, straight after this talk you'll go off to the office where you should check in at the registration desk. Make sure you're wearing the name tags that we posted you out in the mail last week. The staff there will give you each a cloth bag as a little present from us to keep your dancing shoes in for the weekend. Other things useful to take to class each day will be a bottle of water, hopefully you've all brought one with you, and a towel for your face if it's hot and you feel you need one. Also at registration, you can pick up a list for the level class that you're in, so you can start learning people's names. After checking in, this first afternoon is free for everyone. You could use this time to start thinking about your costumes for the final show, but we won't be making them until tomorrow. For those of you who are interested, there's a lecture this afternoon in the main hall on the history of dance. Or you could practice for Sunday's concert in the music room. There is also an informal gathering planned for tonight consisting of mainly easy dances where you can get to know each other. The tests of different levels won't be held until the final afternoon, so there's no need to worry about those yet.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20 on page 4. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
Now, I said I would tell you how to find your way around the community centre. Well, we're standing at the south end of the site. I'll tell you where the bathrooms are first. That's the most important thing. Walk straight ahead from here, past this first big block on your left, and you'll find the bathrooms on your left just after it. Now, equally important, of course, is where you'll sleep. So the bunk rooms are just here on our left. You can see them beside where we're standing now. Now, we also have a games room where you can entertain yourself during your free time. Well, you'll get there if you go straight ahead from where we're standing now, take the first turning right, and carry on to the second building. It's on your right, just before the bike racks. Games and books are in the cupboard there, and there's a ping pong table, air hockey, things like that. Good for a rainy day. OK, what else? The hall is where we'll be for class photos. You can find that in the middle of the site, just south of the music room. The medical room, in case any of you get injured while you're dancing, can be found in the centre of the site also. Go straight on from here, past 2 pathways, and it's on your right beside the music room. The nurse there is very good with sports injuries, so don't hesitate to visit her if you need to. Any questions? Oh yes, the reception office, of course. You'll need to go over there after this talk to register. That's quite a long walk away from here. Go straight ahead and take the third turning on your right. Then you will find that the office is the second building on your left. The staff there are very friendly, and if you have any problems during the weekend, go to see them and they'll help you out.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 3 on page 5. Section 3. Following instructions from their tutor, you will hear 2 environmental science students called Dominic and Ella discussing some ways of solving environmental problems. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25 on page 5. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
OK, everyone, get into pairs and look at the innovative environmental solutions we've been reading about this week. Discuss some of the pros and cons of each one.
You want to work together, Ella?
Sure, Dominic. Which solution do you want to look at first?
I think the supermarket garden project's interesting.
That's where the supermarket grows fruit and vegetables in the store and sells them.
Yes. Understandably, only a few shops have decided to adopt this idea. It's hard to set up.
What's the reaction from customers?
Well, of course, they love the idea. One thing I didn't expect, though,
What was that?
the idea is hugely popular with local chefs, and many of them are finding new ways to use the plants in all their different stages of growth.
I see. I found the solar car park idea to be really practical.
I know what you mean. Putting solar panels on the roofs of car parks to generate electricity might be a cost-effective way to power a whole shopping centre.
The difficulty could be finding space to put all the panels. Some smaller shopping centres probably don't have covered car parks.
That's right. It's a shame because the technology seems to be all there and ready to go if the conditions are right.
What do you think of the wildlife crossing solution? You know, when a bridge or a tunnel is built over or under a major roadway so that animals can cross.
That idea has become very popular and has so many benefits. A lot of research has been done, hasn't it?
Yes. It's not surprising that the data reveals a huge drop in the number of road accidents in areas where there are wildlife crossings. That's one of the predicted outcomes.
Something I read about in the research, which I'd never considered before, was how the animal populations in these areas are affected. Naturally, more of them survive, but because their habitat is not interrupted too much by the roads, the genetic diversity of local species has improved.
That's true. It's worth the huge cost of building them if the result is a win-win for people and animals. I found the 100% renewable energy campaign, like solar and wind energy, to be really impressive.
Yes, it's not so much the size of the movement, only a few countries are involved, as the amount of support offered once a community joins.
Considering the sheer amount of time and planning it takes for a city to convert completely to renewables, the organisers of the movement would need to do that. Did you read about carrot mobbing as an environmental movement?
What's that?
It's where huge numbers of people learn through the internet about where to shop at stores that use the profits to support environmental projects.
So they stop buying products that aren't eco-friendly, like a boycott?
No, actually it's the opposite of that. It allows businesses to fund initiatives to help protect the environment by boosting their profiles. It's a pity that most participants don't get to know each other personally. It's all through online notices.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30 on page 6. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Now everyone, let's look at one particular environmental innovation, aerial reforestation. With your partner, discuss the process involved in this idea.
So, aerial reforestation is where they drop mixtures from planes to sow vegetables, grains or trees and so on in areas that might be hard to reach. Let's see, what are the steps?
Well, the first step is choosing the right area. Whatever size land you're working on, ensuring there's enough light is crucial.
The next step, whatever you're planting, is to make sure you have the right seeds.
To give them a better chance against the competition from other plants, you need to use a lot.
So then you make a mixture with decent quality durable compost for nourishment.
Then do they infuse it with insecticide?
That's not necessary in this model. The next step is pressing the whole thing into a small chunk of clay to make a ball. This may then be covered in an outer material such as paper.
Right. That way, when it lands, it will add balanced nutrients to the mixture.
Yes, and it may also protect it from insects and other plants.
So, a few days before they release it from the plane onto the land below, The final step is dipping it in water, just enough to get the germination process started.
Yes, and after that...
That is the end of Section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to Section 4 on page 7. Section 4. You will hear a lecture on a very popular Canadian food product called maple syrup. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40 on page 7. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Maple syrup can be described as very sweet. Canadians pour it generously over things like pancakes for breakfast. The syrup is produced from the maple tree, and it actually comes from the tree's sap, which is the watery substance that comes out of the trunk of the tree when this is cut. In order for enough sap to be produced, very special climate conditions are needed. In spring, the temperatures need to drop to well below zero at night, but then they need to rise sharply during the day, so they're hugely different over a 24-hour period. And that's exactly what happens in northeastern Canada every spring. The Indigenous peoples of North America, known as the First Nations, discovered the maple's secret long before the Europeans arrived. Early folk stories say it was first discovered by a chief who threw his tomahawk, which is similar to an axe, into the trunk of a tree. Clear sap started to run from the cut. His wife used this sap to boil meat, and the heat turned it into a sweet syrup, which they found delicious. Whether or not that story is true, we do know that the maple tree was very important to First Nations peoples for hundreds of years. Collecting the sap each spring became a tradition among them. Whole families would migrate to the areas where the maple trees grew and set up camp there. They collected the sap from the trees using buckets. Then they needed to concentrate the sap, removing some of the water from it to create syrup. They had two ways of doing this. One way was to drop hot stones from a fire into the buckets to create steam. If repeated often enough, this would eventually concentrate the syrup. Another method that they used to concentrate the syrup was to leave the sap outside overnight, exposed to freezing temperatures. This would mean that a thick layer of ice would form on top, which could be discarded, leaving the sugary sap below. Again, this process could be repeated over several days, and eventually a sweet brown syrup was produced. The First Nations people had various uses for the sap and syrup. They drank the sap fresh from the tree as a tonic, knowing that it was an important source of energy. But for the most part, they reduced the syrup further and then cooled it so that it crystallized into sugar. This was easy to carry and kept indefinitely. European settlers who arrived in Canada began to learn about the syrup from First Nations peoples and further expanded its uses. For example, they incorporated it into medicine of different kinds. They also discovered that by adding yeast to the sap, they could make a maple drink. And by throwing the hot syrup into the snow, they could make a toffee-like candy. But, like the First Nations, they turned most of their sap into maple sugar. For most people, it was the only type of sugar they could afford, since the only alternative was the sugar imported from the Caribbean, which was made from sugar cane, and this was very expensive. However, after 1880, the Canadian government decided to stop charging tax on Caribbean sugar, and this made it much cheaper. That meant it was no longer cost-effective to produce maple sugar, and so syrup making became the only viable industry remaining for Canadians, and that's what we've been doing ever since. At present, maple syrup is enjoying a boom. In the last 2 decades, production has doubled in Canada. However, serious threats remain. Like any agricultural product, the harvest is subject to such things as major storms or the arrival of invasive insects, both of which have happened, and these could destroy everything. It is predicted with some certainty that, in the longer term, climate change will also have an adverse effect on the sap run. Then there are the social factors. Producing maple syrup is a very labor-intensive process, making it an expensive purchase. And of equal concern is the fact that nowadays there's a lot of competition from cheaper, artificially flavored brands. Furthermore, we're at a time when obesity is a major issue, making a product that is 67% sugar increasingly difficult to sell. Nevertheless, there are reasons to be optimistic. Producers are developing markets abroad. Our syrup is currently being exported to over 50 countries. Back here at home, chefs use it enthusiastically. It's certainly high in calories, but it also contains proteins, minerals, and antioxidants. As such, it is still relatively healthy when you compare it with sugar or corn syrup. Canadians are proud of maple syrup and its deep roots in our history and geography. However, the primary reason for maple syrup's success around the world remains its taste. There's nothing quite like it.
That is the end of Section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.